Welcome to today's training on reimbursements and in-kind contributions. This presentation will cover frequently asked questions and address common data entry errors encountered by committees related to reimbursements to candidates, treasurers, and other authorized campaign workers. We will also cover what an in-kind contribution is and when it should be used. In today's presentation, we will cover reimbursements, in-kind contributions, best practices for filing an amendment, and provide additional resources. Please note the following presentation was created for committees to use as a reference when recording purchases made by the candidate or other campaign worker. Please note this list below does not include all scenarios. Instead, this is a resource meant to cover the most common questions. Furthermore, this resource does not provide legal advice or absolve a committee from complying with state and/or local election laws. Additional resources and contact information is available at the end of this presentation. The candidate, treasurer, or an authorized campaign worker may pay for an expense of the campaign from personal funds and seek a reimbursement provided the following. The expense is supported by a receipt that is retained by the treasurer of the political committee. The treasurer reimbursed the person who paid for the expense from the campaign bank account. The reimbursement is made within the same reporting period as the initial transaction, and the reimbursement is reported on the campaign finance report as specified in Chapter 11 of the summary guide. Important. Reimbursements cannot be used in lieu of loans. Accordingly, if a campaign does not have sufficient funds to make a reimbursement, the expenditure should not be made. Instead, the candidate, treasurer, or other authorized campaign worker should make a loan to the campaign. This will allow the campaign to make the purchases directly, and the lender can be repaid the funds as they become available. Further, this approach will allow the campaign to accurately and timely disclose the transactions. Before getting started, you need to ask yourself the following question. Was the candidate, officer, or other authorized campaign worker reimbursed? If the candidate, officer, or other authorized campaign worker was reimbursed, you will follow the steps to enter a reimbursement. If the candidate, officer, or other authorized campaign worker was not reimbursed, the campaign expense will not be recorded in MD-CRIS as an expenditure. Instead, it will be recorded in MD-CRIS as an in-kind contribution. Very often, a committee will enter an expense that was not paid for by campaign funds as an expenditure. Because campaign funds were not used, this will create a bank versus cash balance discrepancy and/or a negative cash balance for the committee. If the committee entered an in-kind contribution as an expenditure, the committee will need to amend the report to delete the expenditure and record the expense as an in-kind contribution. It is also important to note that in-kind contributions are subject to contribution limits. Exceeding contribution limits, including the in-kind contributions, is a violation of Maryland election law and is subject to civil penalties and/or other enforcement action. See Chapter 8 of the summary guide for more details on contribution limits. Knowing the difference between these two is extremely important. As outlined in a Maryland election law, the treasurer is responsible for accurately accounting for all transactions. When entering the method of payment, you will select the method of payment the committee used to reimburse the payee. For example, if a candidate paid cash for a campaign expense and the committee reimbursed the candidate with a check, the method of payment recorded in MD-CRIS is a check. When processing a reimbursement, the treasurer needs to make sure they are using a permissible method of payment to disperse campaign funds. Reimbursing a payee with cash, money order, and/or a credit card can result in civil penalties, as these methods are not permissible under Maryland election law. Payees who are seeking reimbursement can use any method of payment they would like: cash, check, credit card, money order, etc., when paying for the original expenditure if it is with his or her personal funds. However, when the treasurer enters the reimbursement expenditure and disperses campaign funds, only a permissible method of payment may be used. Failure to disperse campaign funds using a permissible method of payment can result in civil penalties or other enforcement action. When entering a reimbursement, you need to enter expenditures and outstanding obligations based on the filing period. If you are entering a reimbursement for the current filing period, simply expand the left side menu and select Enter Expenditures and Outstanding Obligations. If you need to amend a previous report, expand the left side menu, select Amend Transactions, then select New Expenditures and Outstanding Obligations. When entering a reimbursement, the treasurer needs to select the payee type, Reimburse. In the Reimbursee Information section, record the name and address of the candidate or other authorized campaign worker who paid for the campaign expense. Next, complete the expenditure details. Lastly, enter the vendor details. The vendor is the ultimate recipient of campaign funds. For example, if a candidate purchases pizza for his or her campaign workers, the reimbursee is the candidate and the vendor is the business the pizzas were purchased from. As a best practice, use the comment section to place a note regarding additional expenditure details. If all information is recorded correctly, once the transaction is filed, the report will capture the reimbursement payee and the ultimate recipient of campaign funds. An in-kind contribution is a contribution given to a political committee in a form other than money. In-kind contributions include items, services, goods, and anything of value provided to the political committee. The amount of the in-kind contribution is the fair market value of the goods or services provided at the time of the contribution. For example, a person may contribute bumper stickers to a candidate's committee. The amount of the contribution equals the fair market value of the bumper stickers, or in this case, what the individual paid for the bumper stickers. It is important to remember that in-kind contributions count towards the donor's contribution limits. In-kind contributions also include all campaign expenses paid for by the candidate, treasurer, or other authorized campaign worker who did not seek reimbursement. For example, if a candidate purchases $100 of pizza for his campaign workers and pays for the purchase with his or her own funds without seeking reimbursement, this would be considered an in-kind contribution and needs to be recorded on the campaign finance report. When entering an in-kind contribution, you need to Enter Contributions, Transfers, In-Kind Contributions from the left side menu if you're entering for the current filing period. Or, if you're entering for a previous reporting period, expand the left side menu, select Amend Transactions, then select New Contribution. As discussed on a previous slide, when recording a campaign expenditure in which the candidate or another authorized campaign worker incurred but will not be reimbursed for, you will enter this as an in-kind contribution. To do so, select In-Kind Contribution for the contribution type and select the appropriate contributor type. There is an option for Self-Candidate, which will pre-populate the candidate details. For all other authorized campaign workers, you will select Individual. After watching this presentation, you realize you are missing transactions. You will add them in by selecting Amend Transactions from the left side menu. Select the filing period and select Search to launch additional buttons. Select the appropriate buttons to add the missing transactions. If you have multiple transactions that are missing, repeat these steps until all missing transactions are accounted for. Use the Preview Campaign Statement button to check your work. To delete a transaction, select either Amend Transactions for prior period corrections or Edit File Pending Transactions for current period corrections from the left side menu. Search for the transactions by selecting the filing period. You can use the other fields to narrow your search, including transaction type, transaction category, amount range, etc. Once the transaction is located, select the checkbox to the far right of the screen for each transaction. Once each transaction is selected, click on the Delete Selected Records button at the bottom of the screen. Use the Preview Campaign Statement button to check your work. As a best practice, committees are encouraged to preview their campaign finance reports prior to filing their final closure request by selecting File Preview. To access File Preview, expand the left side menu and select either View Edit Pending Transactions module for new reports or select Amend Transactions for previously filed reports. This will allow the committee to check their work before filing to catch any remaining errors. Please note that Preview Campaign Statement is optional. If everything is in balance and accurate, the committee will still need to select File Amendment to State button for the changes to go through. For questions or additional information, please contact the Audit and Enforcement Unit or Division of Candidacy and Campaign Finance.